Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Literacy. Why am I going spooky? I don't know. Happy Wednesday. How are we all doing? I hope we are well. I have just been talking to myself in my room for the past half an hour because I'm giving a talk tomorrow. Excuse me. So this may be a slightly shorter stream, simply because I need to save my voice. Excuse me if that was loud. Sorry. Hello, everybody. How are we all doing? You're planning a government takeover in John's Court. For legal purposes, as a joke. In Minecraft. Cool. There we go. Andy got there. Well, thank you very much, Andy, for resubscribing. 30 months. My goodness me. But yes, hello, everybody. Hello, Smallcog. Hello, Lynn. Hello, Llama, Parola, Andy, Lynn. I've said Lynn already. You get your name mentioned twice. Get you. Queek. Anyone else? I've forgotten. Sam, obviously. But yes, I hope we are all doing well. Happy Wednesday and all of that stuff. I realise I've been talking quite a lot today, actually, and yesterday. I took probably the most frustrating choir rehearsal I've ever taken, so that was fun and exciting. But yeah, how's everybody's weeks going? I hope they are going well. I hope you are having good weather wherever you are. Certainly in the UK, we've had it's been a really good week, actually. It's been lovely. It's feeling like spring. Still a little bit chilly, but yeah. I don't know if have I spoken to you, chat, since I've had my new car? If I haven't, I have a new car. It's all very exciting. It has 6 gears. I've never had a 6th gear before. I feel spoilt. You're so glad carnival celebrations are over and you can use the bus again, as usual. Joys. I've seen pictures of various people celebrating carnival. I assume in the Netherlands? ? You're here for pillow fort time? Good. It's a lot of gears, I know, right? Well, spoken like a true American who doesn't have any. I know I'm assuming, but I know most American cars are automatic. You'll have a new car next week? Nice! You'll have AC, that's new. Oh, good, thank goodness for that. Is it a French car, though? Because I have opinions on French cars. Having been in one that broke down the week after. Oh, you drove a 5-speed manual? I do apologise, Andy. You're one of the cultured Americans. It's an Italian one. Oh, right, okay. Just as bad, really. But yeah. Mine is Czech. Mine's a Skoda. Which I believe is the actual way of pronouncing it. It's a Skoda, I think. Anyone who's remotely knowledgeable in, Czech and the various Baltic languages will correct me for my awful pronunciation, I'm sure. But it's boring and grey. I'm sad. I wanted a yellow car. But, second-hand cars, important to get rather than new. And unfortunately, you don't get a choice in the colour on a second-hand car. But, hey-ho. You have the opportunity to get a yellow one. Llama, you must get a yellow car. Please get a yellow car. Please. You don't have to get a yellow car. Oh, yellow is the colour of the post? Oh, fair enough. Oh, that's annoying then. Yeah, I kind of just want to get a yellow car just to annoy Sam. Because then, every time I drive past him or near him, he'll have to say yellow car. So what I would do is I would, just drive around and drive away and then come back, and he'd forget that it was me. He'd think it was just someone else's car going around, and then he'd be forced to say yellow car again. And I would slowly drive him mad. And this is a test to see whether he's listening or not. You weren't listening, were you? Saw so many grey and white black cars these days, it's sad. Yeah. You put a beat on front of it and call it the Canary. Well, if anyone here has watched any Simone Yetch, she made a cheese car that looked like a thing of oh god, slice? No, wedge. There we go, wedge of cheese. Sam, I was saying that if I had a yellow car, I would just keep driving it near you, so you would be forced to say yellow car. Isn't Sam kind of mad already? Yeah. I mean, he's with me. Of course he's mad. Also, hello, Angeline. Hope you are well. Welcome in. Good time zone indeed. But yeah. I guess it's new car time of year. Apparently it is actually like the best time of year to buy new cars, so I'm quite glad that... I'm not glad that I bought a new car, because, you know, circumstances could have been better. But yes, it just kind of coincided quite nicely. But yeah, have discovered that I'm not entirely over the crash. Thought I was, am not. Getting behind the wheel again is evidence that, you know, the body remembers, you know, traumatic experiences. And I'm not necessarily saying that my experience was particularly I guess it was fairly traumatic, actually. It was quite dramatic, certainly. But it's quite interesting because in my head I'm fine. But I am reacting to things a lot kind of quicker and sort of snappily on the road than I had previously. Not unsafely or anything, but I'm just a lot more alert. And that is obviously, you know, being a lot more alert is also kind of stressful. So, yeah, it's been kind of interesting suddenly going, oh, I think also because this month I haven't actually got a lot to, I've deliberately sort of not got too much on this month. So, and basically I crashed and then was really busy. So didn't really have much of a time to kind of process anything. And now it's just suddenly like, oh yeah, I need to actually deal with this. So I think that might be part of it as well. So yeah, it'll take a bit of time, but I'm driving just an hour's journey tomorrow, but it will be in the dark. So hopefully that'll go well, and hopefully that'll go some way to you know, making things easier. Tetris. Tetris is scientifically proven to help overcome traumatic experiences. Now, I can't tell whether you're being sarcastic or genuine, because I can believe it probably could be. Also, hello, Yoru. How are you? Hope you are well. This is genuine. Huh, yeah. I'm kind of not surprised. It kind of makes sense. But yeah, hope you're doing well. Brain says trauma? What trauma? Oh, that trauma. Yeah, exactly. That's really interesting. Maybe I should do some Tetris then. Repetitive type brain games are really good for reprogramming your brain. Ah. Sam does not get on with Tetris. I don't actually... I will have played Tetris, but I don't know if I'm any good at it. Play phone games while driving to help with stress. Yeah, that's perfect solution, that. Love that. Don't be on your phone and drive. Just saying that as a PSA, just in case anyone comes for me. When you wrecked your first car, you had to turn around later that day and make a 3-hour trip. Oh my god. And another one 2 days later, which was terrifying, but it ended up being good for you. Jeez, yeah, that's not fun. But yeah, I guess if it was good for you, then that's good. Golden Idol is a sort of Tetris for words. I guess that is true. Yes, there's a new Golden Idol. Is it DLC or just chapter out? And Sam and I have realised that we are slightly addicted to it, because every time a new Golden Idol thing, DLC chapter, there you go. Every time a chapter comes out, we're just like, oh, let's play it. We need to play it now. It's sort of like our crack. It's not very good for us. No, it's very good for us. It's puzzles. Puzzles are great. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have. I think my words have run out. Jigsaw puzzle. I need to get a new jigsaw puzzle, actually, because I have done all the ones I have. My latest one I did it at Christmas, and it was a Discworld one, and it was really good. So, you wish the N64 track playtime because you have so many hours. So nice. Lady Mephistopheles, hello, good time zone. I feel like you're someone who should know. I know you're not Czech, but, you know, close enough. Skoda, the car brand, is it Skoda? Is that how you pronounce it? Because it's got the weird, you know, V accenty thing on the S. Jigsaw puzzle from charity shops by FC. Yeah, that's the thing. I've been seeing actually a lot of charity shops with jigsaw puzzles. The problem with that is you don't actually 100% know that they've got all the pieces. It is sh as in shock. Thank you. I thought you would know. So I was right. Skoda. Yay. Yeah, everybody's doing jigsaws. Parola's got jigsaws online. Let's all do jigsaws, and let's get cracking on some more Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. Czechs say Skoda, but Poles say Skoda. That's interesting. Because I feel like, doesn't Polish also have the whatever the heck it's called? You know, the upside down. No, the sort of arrow pointing down over things. Or am I just imagining that? Is that just a Czech thing? We have the sound, you just don't do it. Fair enough. Maybe you're just doing it to annoy the Czechs. That would be fair enough, really. And Andy, if you dare do that, I think everybody might hunt you down and force you to not only put all the jigsaw pieces back in the various correct boxes, but then do them all. I think that would be a fitting punishment. Oh, you write it as SZ. Ah, interesting. So you don't have the thing, you just have the sound. Very cool. Languages are fun. Finnish, on the other hand, is weird as heck. Oh, I could get into this topic. No, we'll get into this probably on a Chilitera stream, because I have some fun things to say about Finnish and languages in general, because I'm reading a cool book at the moment and it's very interesting. Llama, stop. Yes, it does. It doesn't. No, you're right. You're correct. And don't you kite me into this. Why am I so coughing? Why am I so coughing? Yeah, right. I'm going to start reading, chat, because otherwise my words are just going to stop. They're going to dry up. I'm going to have no words left when I have to talk to people tomorrow. And I've lost my flipping bookmark. Get back here. Right. Innocent whistling. You could not be innocent if you tried. Yes. So, what happened last time? Stuff and things. We don't like Obadiah Slope. And currently our sort of hero, Archdeacon Grantley, is dead set against him, and it's very obvious that Slope has designs on the bishopric, and we don't want that. That is bad. So we shall see what happens, basically. So yeah, anyway. Let us continue with Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. Chapter 9. The Stanhope Family. It is now 3 months since Dr. Prudy began his reign, and changes have already been effected in the diocese which show at least the energy of an active mind. Among other things, absentee clergymen have been favoured with hints much too strong to be overlooked. Poor dear old Bishop Grantley had on this matter been too lenient, and the Archdeacon had never been inclined to be severe with those who were absent on reputable pretences, and who provided for their duties in a liberal way. Among the greatest of the diocesan sinners in this respect was Dr. Vesey Stanhope. Years had now passed since he had done a day's duty, and yet there was no reason against his doing duty except a want of inclination on his own part. He held a prebendal stall in the diocese, one of the best residences in the close, and the 2 large rectories of Crabtree Canocorum and Stoppingham. Indeed, he had the cure of 3 parishes, for that of Eiderdown was joined to Stoppingham. He had resided in Italy for 12 years. His first going there had been attributed to a sore throat, and that sore throat, though never repeated in any violent manner, had stood him in such stead that it had enabled him to live in easy idleness ever since. He had now been summoned home, not indeed with rough violence or by any peremptory command, but by a mandate which he found himself unable to disregard. Mr. Slope had written to him by the bishop's desire. In the first place, the bishop much wanted the valuable cooperation of Dr. Vesey Stanhope in the diocese. In the next, the bishop thought it his imperative duty to become personally acquainted with the most conspicuous of his diocesan clergy. Then the bishop thought it essentially necessary for Dr. Stanhope's own interests that Dr. Stanhope should, at any rate for a time, return to Barchester. And lastly, it was said that so strong a feeling was at the present moment evinced by the hierarchs of the Church with reference to the absence of its clerical members, that it behoved Dr. Vesey Stanhope not to allow his name to stand among those which would probably in a few months be submitted to the councils of the nation. There was something so ambiguously frightful in this last threat that Dr. Stanhope determined to spend 2 or 3 summer months at his residence in Barchester. His rectories were inhabited by his curates, and he felt himself from disuse to be unfit for parochial duty, but his prebendal home was kept empty for him, and he thought it probable that he might be able now and again to preach a prebendal sermon. He arrived, therefore, with all his family at Barchester, and he and they must be introduced to my readers. The great family characteristic of the Stanhopes might probably be said to be heartlessness, but this want of feeling was, in most of them, accompanied by so great an amount of good nature as to make itself but little noticeable to the world. They were so prone to oblige their neighbours that their neighbours failed to perceive how indifferent to them was the happiness and well-being of those around them. The Stanhopes would visit you in your sickness, provided it was not contagious, would bring you oranges, French novels, and the last new bit of scandal, and then hear of your death or your recovery with an equally indifferent composure. Their conduct to each other was the same as to the world. They bore and forbore, and there was sometimes, as will be seen, much necessity for forbearing. But their love among themselves rarely reached above this. It is astonishing how much each of the family was able to do, and how much each did, to prevent the well-being of the other 4. For there were 5 in all, the doctor, namely, and Mrs. Stanhope, 2 daughters and 1 son. The doctor, perhaps, was the least singular and most estimable of them all, and yet such good qualities as he possessed were all negative. He was a good-looking, rather plethoric gentleman of about 60 years of age. His hair was snow-white, very plentiful, and somewhat like wool of the finest description. His whiskers were very large and very white, and gave to his face the appearance of a benevolent, sleepy old lion. His dress was always unexceptionable. Although he had lived so many years in Italy, it was invariably of a decent clerical hue, but it never was hyperclerical. He was a man not given to much talking, but what little he did say was generally well said. His reading seldom went beyond romances and poetry of the lightest and not always most moral description. He was thoroughly a bon vivant, an accomplished judge of wine, though he never drank to excess, and a most inexorable critic in all affairs touching the kitchen. He had had much to forgive in his own family, since a family had grown up around him, and had forgiven everything, except inattention to his dinner. His weakness in that respect was now fully understood, and his temper but seldom tried. As Dr. Stanhope was a clergyman, it may be supposed that his religious convictions made up a considerable part of his character, but this was not so. That he had religious convictions must be believed, but he rarely obtruded them, even on his children. This abstinence on his part was not systematic, but very characteristic of the man. It was not that he had predetermined never to influence their thoughts, but he was so habitually idle that his time for doing so had never come till the opportunity for doing so was gone forever. Whatever conviction the father may have had, the children were at any rate but indifferent members of the church from which he drew his income. Such was Dr. Stanhope. The features of Mrs. Stanhope's character were even less plainly marked than those of her lord. The far niente of her Italian life had entered into her very soul, and brought her to regard a state of inactivity as the only earthly good. In manner and appearance she was exceedingly prepossessing. She had been a beauty, and even now, at 55, she was a handsome woman. Her dress was always perfect. She never dressed but once in the day, and never appeared till between 3 and 4, but when she did appear, she appeared at her best. Whether the toil rested partly with her or wholly with her handmaid, it is not for such a one as the author even to imagine. The structure of her attire was always elaborate, and yet never over-laboured. She was rich in apparel, but not bedizened with finery. Her ornaments were costly, rare, and such as could not fail to attract notice, but they did not look as though worn with that purpose. She well knew the great architectural secret of decorating her constructions, and never descended to construct a decoration. But when we have said that Mrs. Stanhope knew how to dress, and used her knowledge daily, we have said all. Other purpose in life she had none. It was something, indeed, that she did not interfere with the purposes of others. In early life she had undergone great trials with reference to the doctor's dinners, but for the last 10 or 12 years her eldest daughter Charlotte had taken that labour off her hands, and she had little to trouble her. Little, that is, till the edict for this terrible English journey had gone forth. Since then, indeed, her life had been laborious enough. For such a one, the toil of being carried from the shores of Como to the city of Barchester is more than labour enough, let the care of the carriers be ever so vigilant. Mrs. Stanhope had been obliged to have every one of her dresses taken in from the effects of the journey. Charlotte Stanhope was at this time about 35 years old, and whatever may have been her faults, she had none of those which belong particularly to old young ladies. She neither dressed young, nor talked young, nor indeed looked young. She appeared to be perfectly content with her time of life, and in no way affected the graces of youth. She was a fine young woman, and had she been a man, would have been a very fine young man. All that was done in the house, and that was not done by servants, was done by her. She gave the orders, paid the bills, hired and dismissed the domestics, made the tea, carved the meat, and managed everything in the Stanhope household. She, and she alone, could ever induce her father to look into the state of his worldly concerns. She, and she alone, could in any degree control the absurdities of her sister. She, and she alone, prevented the whole family from falling into utter disrepute and beggary. It was by her advice that they now found themselves very unpleasantly situated in Barchester. So far, the character of Charlotte Stanhope is not unprepossessing. But it remains to be said that the influence which she had in her family, though it had been used to a certain extent for their worldly well-being, had not been used to their real benefit, as it might have been. She had aided her father in his indifference to his professional duties, counselling him that his livings were as much his individual property as the estates of his elder brother were the property of that worthy peer. She had for years past stifled every little rising wish for a return to England, which the doctor had from time to time expressed. She had encouraged her mother in her idleness in order that she herself might be mistress and manager of the Stanhope household. She had encouraged and fostered the follies of her sister, though she was always willing and often able to protect her from their probable result. She had done her best, and had thoroughly succeeded in spoiling her brother, and turning him loose upon the world, an idle man without a profession, and without a shilling that he could call his own. Miss Stanhope was a clever woman, able to talk on most subjects, and quite indifferent as to what the subject was. She prided herself on her freedom from English prejudice, and she might have added, from feminine delicacy. On religion she was a pure free thinker, and, with much want of true affection, delighted to throw out her own views before the troubled mind of her father. To have shaken what remained of his Church of England faith would have gratified her much, but the idea of his abandoning his preferment in the Church had never once presented itself to her mind. How could he, indeed, when he had no income from any other source? But the two most prominent members of the family still remain to be described. The second child had been christened Madeline, and had been a great beauty. We need not say had been, for she was never more beautiful than at the time of which we write, though her person for many years had been disfigured by an accident. It is unnecessary that we should give in detail the early history of Madeline Stanhope. She had gone to Italy when about 17 years of age, had been allowed to make the most of her surpassing beauty in the saloons of Milan and among the crowded villas along the shores of the Lake of Como. She had become famous for adventures in which her character was just not lost, and had destroyed the hearts of a dozen cavaliers without once being touched in her own. Blood had flowed in quarrels about her charms, and she heard of these encounters with pleasurable excitement. It had been told of her that on one occasion she had stood by in the disguise of a page and had seen her lover fall. As is so often the case, she had married the very worst of those who sought her hand. Why she had chosen Paolo Neroni, a man of no birth and no property, a mere captain in the Pope's guard, one who had come up to Milan either simply as an adventurer or else as a spy, a man of harsh temper and oily manners, mean in figure, swarthy in face, and so false in words as to be hourly detected, need not now be told. When the moment for doing so came, she had probably no alternative. He, at any rate, had become her husband, and after a prolonged honeymoon among the lakes, they had gone together to Rome, the papal captain having vainly endeavoured to induce his wife to remain behind him. 6 months afterwards, she arrived at her father's house a cripple and a mother. She had arrived without even notice, with hardly clothes to cover her, and without one of those many ornaments which had graced her bridal trousseau. Her baby was in the arms of a poor girl from Milan, whom she had taken in exchange for the Roman maid who had accompanied her thus far, and who had then, as her mistress said, become homesick and had returned. It was clear that the lady had determined that there should be no witness to tell stories of her life in Rome. She had fallen, she said, in ascending a ruin, and had fatally injured the sinews of her knee, so fatally that when she stood she lost 8 inches of her accustomed height, so fatally that when she essayed to move she could only drag herself painfully along, with protruded hip and extended foot, in a manner less graceful than that of a hunchback. She had consequently made up her mind, once and for ever, that she would never stand, and never attempt to move herself. Stories were not slow to follow her, averring that she had been cruelly ill-used by Neroni, and that to his violence had she owed her accident. Be that as it may, little had been said about her husband, but that little had made it clearly intelligible to the family that Signor Neroni was to be seen and heard of no more. There was no question as to readmitting the poor ill-used beauty to her old family rights, no question as to adopting her infant daughter beneath the Stanhope roof-tree. Though heartless, the Stanhopes were not selfish. The two were taken in, petted, made much of, for a time all but adored, and then felt by the two parents to be great nuisances in the house. But in the house the lady was, and there she remained, having her own way, though that way was not very comfortable with the customary usages of an English clergyman. Madame Neroni, though forced to give up all motion in the world, had no intention whatever of giving up the world itself. The beauty of her face was uninjured, and that beauty was of a peculiar kind. Her copious, rich brown hair was worn in Grecian bandeaux round her head, displaying as much as possible of her forehead and cheeks. Her forehead, though rather low, was very beautiful from its perfect contour and pearly whiteness. Her eyes were long and large, and marvellously bright. Might I venture to say, bright as Lucifer's, I should perhaps best express the depth of their brilliancy. They were dreadful eyes to look at, such as would absolutely deter any man of quiet mind and easy spirit from attempting a passage of arms with such foes. There was talent in them, and the fire of passion and the play of wit, but there was no love. Cruelty was there, instead, and courage, a desire of masterhood, cunning, and a wish for mischief. And yet, as eyes, they were very beautiful. The eyelashes were long and perfect, and the long, steady, unabashed gaze with which she would look into the face of her admirer fascinated while it frightened him. She was a basilisk, from whom an ardent lover of beauty could make no escape. Her nose and mouth and teeth and chin and neck and bust were perfect, much more so at 28 than they had been at 18. What wonder then that with such charm still glowing in her face, and with such deformity destroying her figure, she should resolve to be seen, but only to be seen reclining on a sofa. Her resolve had not been carried out without difficulty. She had still frequented the opera at Milan. She had still been seen occasionally in the saloons of the noblesse. She had caused herself to be carried in and out from her carriage, and that in such a manner as in no wise to disturb her charms, disarrange her dress, or expose her deformities. Her sister always accompanied her, and a maid, a manservant also, and on state occasions 2. It was impossible that her purpose could have been achieved with less, and yet, poor as she was, she had achieved her purpose. And then again, the more dissolute Italian youths of Milan frequented the Stanhope villa and surrounded her couch, not greatly to her father's satisfaction. Sometimes his spirit would rise, a dark spot would show itself on his cheek, and he would rebel. But Charlotte would assuage him with some peculiar triumph of her culinary art, and all again would be smooth for a while. Madeline affected all manner of rich and quaint devices in the garniture of her room, her person, and her feminine belongings. In nothing was this more apparent than in the visiting card which she had prepared for her use. For such an article one would say that she, in her present state, could have but small need, seeing how improbable it was that she should make a morning call, but not such was her own opinion. Her card was surrounded by a deep border of gilding. On this she had imprinted, in 3 lines, La Signora Madeline Vesey Neroni, nata Stanhope. And over the name she had a bright gilt coronet, which certainly looked very magnificent. How she had come to concoct such a name for herself it would be difficult to explain. Her father had been christened Vesey, as another man is christened Thomas, and she had no more right to assume it than would have the daughter of a Mr. Josiah Jones to call herself Mrs. Josiah Smith on marrying a man of the latter name. The gold coronet was equally out of place, and perhaps inserted with even less excuse. Paolo Neroni had not the faintest title to call himself a scion of even Italian nobility. Had the pair met in England, Neroni would probably have been a count, but they had met in Italy, and any such pretence on his part would have been simply ridiculous. A coronet, however, was a pretty ornament, and if it could solace a poor cripple to have such on her card, who would begrudge it to her? Of her husband, or of his individual family, she never spoke. But with her admirers she would often allude in a mysterious way to her married life and isolated state, and, pointing to her daughter, would call her the last of the blood of the emperors, thus referring Neroni's extraction to the old Roman family from which the worst of the Caesars sprang. The signora was not without talent, and not without a certain sort of industry. She was an indomitable letter-writer, and her letters were worth the postage. They were full of wit, mischief, satire, love, latitudinarian philosophy, free religion, and sometimes, alas, loose ribaldry. The subject, however, depended entirely on the recipient, and she was prepared to correspond with anyone but moral young ladies or stiff old women. She wrote also a kind of poetry, generally in Italian, and short romances, generally in French. She read much of a desultory sort of literature, and as a modern linguist had really made great proficiency. Such was the lady who had now come to wound the hearts of the men of Barchester. Ethelbert Stanhope was in some respects like his younger sister, but he was less inestimable as a man than she as a woman. His great fault was an entire absence of that principle which should have induced him, as the son of a man without fortune, to earn his own bread. Many attempts had been made to get him to do so, but these had all been frustrated, not so much by idleness on his part, as by a disinclination to exert himself in any way not to his taste. He had been educated at Eton, and had been intended for the church, but had left Cambridge in disgust after a single term, and notified to his father his intention to study for the bar. Preparatory to that, he thought it well that he should attend a German university, and consequently went to Leipzig. There he remained 2 years, and brought away a knowledge of German and a taste for the fine arts. He still, however, intended himself for the bar, took chambers, engaged himself to sit at the feet of a learned pundit, and spent a season in London. He there found that all his aptitudes inclined him to the life of an artist, and he determined to live by painting. With this object he returned to Milan, and had himself rigged out for Rome. As a painter he might have earned his bread, for he wanted only diligence to excel. But when at Rome his mind was carried away by other things. He soon wrote home for money, saying that he had been converted to the Mother Church, that he was already an acolyte of the Jesuits, and that he was about to start with others to Palestine on a mission for converting Jews. He did go to Judea, but being unable to convert the Jews, was converted by them. He again wrote home to say that Moses was the only giver of perfect laws to the world, that the coming of the true Messiah was at hand, that great things were doing in Palestine, and that he had met one of the family of Sidonia, a most remarkable man, who was now on his way to Western Europe, whom he had induced to deviate from his route with the object of calling at the Stanhope Villa. Ethelbert then expressed his hope that his mother and sisters would listen to this wonderful prophet. His father, he knew, could not do so from pecuniary considerations. This Sidonia, however, did not take so strong a fancy to him as another of that family once did to a young English nobleman. At least he provided him with no heaps of gold as large as lions, so that the Judaized Ethelbert was again obliged to draw on the revenues of the Christian Church. It is needless to tell how the father swore that he would send no more money and receive no Jew, nor how Charlotte declared that Ethelbert could not be left penniless in Jerusalem, and how La Signora Neroni resolved to have Sidonia at her feet. The money was sent, and the Jew did come. The Jew did come, but he was not at all to the taste of La Signora. He was a dirty little old man, and though he had provided no golden lions, he had, it seems, relieved young Stanhope's necessities. He positively refused to leave the villa till he had got a bill from the doctor on his London bankers. Ethelbert did not long remain a Jew. He soon reappeared at the villa without prejudices on the subject of his religion, and with a firm resolve to achieve fame and fortune as a sculptor. He brought with him some models which he had originated at Rome, and which really gave such fair promise that his father was induced to go to further expense in furthering these views. Ethelbert opened an establishment, or rather took lodgings in a workshop, at Carrara, and there spoiled much marble, and made some few pretty images. Since that period, now 4 years ago, he had alternated between Carrara and the villa, but his sojourns at the workshop became shorter and shorter, and those at the villa longer and longer. 'Twas no wonder, for Carrara is not a spot in which any Englishman would like to dwell. When the family started for England, he had resolved not to be left behind, and with the assistance of his elder sister had carried his point against his father's wishes. It was necessary, he said, that he should come to England for orders. How otherwise was he to bring his profession to account? In personal appearance, Ethelbert Stanhope was the most singular of beings. He was certainly very handsome. He had his sister Madeline's eyes without their stare, and without their hard, cunning, cruel firmness. They were also very much lighter, and of so light and clear a blue as to make his face remarkable, if nothing else did so. On entering a room with him, Ethelbert's blue eyes would be the first thing you would see, and on leaving it almost the last you would forget. His light hair was very long and silky, coming down over his coat. His beard had been prepared in Holy Land and was patriarchal. He never shaved and rarely trimmed it. It was glossy, soft, clean, and altogether not unprepossessing. It was such that ladies might desire to reel it off and work it into their patterns in lieu of floss silk. His complexion was fair and almost pink. He was small in height and slender in limb, but well made, and his voice was of peculiar sweetness. In manner and dress he was equally remarkable. He had none of the mauvaise honte of an Englishman. He required no introduction to make himself agreeable to any person. He habitually addressed strangers, ladies as well as men, without any such formality, and in doing so never seemed to meet with rebuke. His costume cannot be described because it was so various, but it was always totally opposed in every principle of colour and construction to the dress of those with whom he for the time consorted. He was habitually addicted to making love to ladies, and did so without any scruple of conscience, or any idea that such a practice was amiss. He had no heart to touch himself, and was literally unaware that humanity was subject to such an infliction. He had not thought much about it, but had he been asked, would have said that ill-treating a lady's heart meant injuring her promotion in the world. His principles, therefore, forbade him to pay attention to a girl if he thought any man was present whom it might suit her to marry. In this manner his good nature frequently interfered with his amusement, but he had no other motive in abstaining from the fullest declarations of love to every girl that pleased his eye. Bertie Stanhope, as he was generally called, was, however, popular with both sexes, and with Italians as well as English. His circle of acquaintance was very large, and embraced people of all sorts. He had no respect for rank, and no aversion to those below him. He had lived on familiar terms with English peers, German shopkeepers, and Roman priests. All people were nearly alike to him. He was above, or rather below, all prejudices. No virtue could charm him, no vice shock him. He had about him a natural good manner, which seemed to qualify him for the highest circles, and yet he was never out of place in the lowest. He had no principle, no regard for others, no self-respect, no desire to be other than a drone in the hive, if only he could, as a drone, get what honey was sufficient for him. Of honey in his latter days it may probably be presaged that he will have but short allowance. Such was the family of the Stanhopes, who at this period suddenly joined themselves to the ecclesiastical circle of Barchester Close. Any stranger union it would be impossible perhaps to conceive, and it was not as though they all fell down into the cathedral precincts hitherto unknown and untalked of. In such case no amalgamation would have been at all probable between the newcomers and either the Proudy set or the Grantley set. But such was far from being the case. The Stanhopes were all known by name in Barchester, and Barchester was prepared to receive them with open arms. The doctor was one of her prebendaries, one of her rectors, one of her pillars of strength, and was, moreover, counted on as a sure ally both by Proudys and Grantleys. He himself was the brother of one peer, and his wife was the sister of another, and both these peers were lords of Whiggish tendency, with whom the new bishop had some sort of alliance. This was sufficient to give to Mr. Slope high hope that he might enlist Dr. Stanhope on his side before his enemies could outmanoeuvre him. On the other hand, the old dean had many years ago, in the days of the doctor's clerical energies, been instrumental in assisting him in his views as to preferment, And many, many years ago also, the two doctors, Stanhope and Grantley, had, as young parsons, been joyous together in the common rooms of Oxford. Dr. Grantley, consequently, did not doubt but that the newcomer would range himself under his banners. Little did any of them dream of what ingredients the Stanhope family was now composed. And I think there we shall take a break. I hope you are enjoying so far. I quite like the characters of the Stanhope family. They sound fun. Obviously, words of the time, disability is not necessarily treated with the best, words, but I feel like with this it is not, because often what happens with disabled characters in a lot of these kind of books are often sort of painted as either evil because they are disabled, or neither are Jews. I was going to get onto that in a sec. They are painted as evil because they are disabled, or like, I don't know, somehow they have some kind of mental health issue as well as being disabled, whereas this just sounds like this sounds like a woman who is just a bit manipulative as a person, and or at least this is kind of a trauma response to possibly having been abused by her husband. And I'm kind of glad that is sort of addressed, rather than she's awful because she's disabled. Like, that is very much not the vibe we're going for here, and that's not what he's saying, which I'm quite glad about. And yes, the general stereotyping of Jews is still there, but also I feel like this is also taken with a pinch of salt, in the idiot son who cannot stick to one thing is being taken in by pretty much everybody, of which just one of these people happens to be Jewish. So yeah, I feel like in the grand scheme of things, he's just kind of gullible, and everybody's taking advantage of him, not just this one Jewish guy. But yes, I hope you're enjoying so far. This is going to be quite entertaining now, I feel. We're going to have a bit of a war over the Stanhope family. Let's see how this goes. But yes, go take a break, do break-related things, and we will be back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. welcome back. I hope we had a good break. Did break-related things. I didn't. I just sat here and drank some water. Very exciting. Oh, excuse me. But, yeah. Hope we're doing well. And, yes, hello to Cider. Who obviously has a lot to say. Drinking water isn't. Yeah, it is. This is true. It is break related. The puzzlers kept puzzling. Yeah, I hope the puzzles are going well. Yeah. I think I'll probably just do the one more chapter for tonight. See how long that takes us, because I think these are fairly long chapters. Cider says, hello, Cider. So you're done with the second one. Damn, you're ripping through these puzzles. Yes, I'll probably just do one more chapter because, as I say, I have more talking to do tomorrow, so need to kind of make sure my voice is doing all right. So yeah, I'll see how this one goes, and might be a bit of an early finish on the stream, might not be. I'm not sure. We shall have to see. But yes, I hope you're all enjoying so far, and yeah, I do really like these character descriptions. They are quite a lot of fun. And I'm curious to see how these new characters, excuse me, are influenced by whatever's going on in Barchester. Must take care of voice, yes, absolutely. So yeah, if we're all back from break, if we all have, a hot drink, a cat possibly, or dog, or, cozy blanket, or all of the above, then we shall continue. There was some location name that made you laugh a little. Oh god, I don't even know anymore. Oh yeah, there's some good location names here. Was it the you have chocolate? Excellent. Yeah, it was where he was, wasn't it? Canonicorum, which I didn't say correctly, and Stogpingum, I don't know. These are probably very funny for a reason that I do not understand. But anyway, bippity boppity boo, quite. If we are all sitting comfortably, I shall continue with Chapter 10. Mrs. Prudy's reception commenced. The bishop and his wife had only spent 3 or 4 days in Barchester on the occasion of their first visit. His lordship had, as we have seen, taken his seat on his throne, but his demeanour there, into which it had been his intention to infuse much hierarchical dignity, had been a good deal disarranged by the audacity of his chaplain's sermon. Oops, sorry, I just punched the microphone there. Apologies. He had hardly dared to look his clergy in the face, and to declare by the severity of his countenance that in truth he meant all that his factotum was saying on his behalf, nor yet did he dare to throw Mr. Slope over, and show to those around him that he was no party to the sermon, and would resent it. He had accordingly blessed his people in a shambling manner, not at all to his own satisfaction, and had walked back to his palace with his mind very doubtful as to what he would say to his chaplain on the subject. He did not remain long in doubt. He had hardly doffed his lawn when the partner of all his toils entered his study, and exclaimed, even before she had seated herself, "Bishop, did you ever hear a more sublime, more spirit-moving, more appropriate discourse than that?" "Well, my love, he..." The bishop did not know what to say. "I hope, my lord, you don't mean to say you disapprove?" There was a look about the lady's eye which did not admit of my lord's disapproving at that moment. He felt that if he intended to disapprove, it must be now or never, but he also felt that it could not be now. It was not in him to say to the wife of his bosom that Mr. Slope's sermon was ill-timed, impertinent, and vexatious. No, replied the bishop. No, I can't say I disapprove. A very clever sermon, and very well intended, and I dare say will do a great deal of good. This last praise was added, seeing that what he had already said by no means satisfied Mrs. Proudie. I hope it will, said she. I am sure it was well deserved. Did you ever in your life, Bishop, hear anything so like play-acting as the way in which Mr. Harding sings the litany? I shall beg Mr. Slope to continue a course of sermons on the subject till all that is altered. We will have, at any rate, in our cathedral, a decent, godly, modest morning service. There must be no more play-acting here now. And so the lady rang for lunch. The bishop knew more about cathedrals and deans and precentors and church services than his wife did, and also more of a bishop's powers. But he thought it better at present to let the subject drop. My dear, said he, I think we must go back to London on Tuesday. I find my staying here will be very inconvenient to the government. The bishop knew that to this proposal his wife would not object, and he also felt that by thus retreating from the ground of battle, the heat of the fight might be got over in his absence. Mr. Slope will remain here, of course, said the lady. Oh, of course, said the bishop. Thus, after less than a week's sojourn in his palace, did the bishop fly from Barchester, nor did he return to it for 2 months, the London season being then over. During that time Mr. Slope was not idle, but he did not again essay to preach in the cathedral. In answer to Mrs. Proudie's letters advising a course of sermons, he had pleaded that he would at any rate wish to put off such an undertaking till she was there to hear them. He had employed his time in consolidating a Proudie and Slope party, or rather a Slope and Proudie party, and he had not employed his time in vain. He did not meddle with the dean and his chapter, except by giving them little teasing intimations of the bishop's wishes about this, and the bishop's feelings about that, in a manner which was to them sufficiently annoying, but which they could not resent. He preached once or twice in a distant church in the suburbs of the city, but made no allusion to the cathedral service. He commenced the establishment of 2 Bishop Barchester's Sabbath-day schools, gave notice of a proposed Bishop's Barchester Young Men's Sabbath Evening Lecture Room, and wrote 3 or 4 letters to the manager of the Barchester Branch Railway, informing him how anxious the bishop was that the Sunday trains should be discontinued. At the end of 2 months, however, the bishop and the lady reappeared, and as a happy harbinger of their return, heralded their advent by the promise of an evening party on the largest scale. The tickets of invitation were sent out from London. They were dated from Bruton Street, and were dispatched by the odious Sabbath-breaking railway in a huge brown paper parcel to Mr. Slope. Everybody calling himself a gentleman or herself a lady within the city of Barchester, and a circle of 2 miles round it, was included. Tickets were sent to all the diocesan clergy, and also to many other persons of priestly note, of whose absence the bishop, or at least the bishop's wife, felt tolerably confident. It was intended, however, to be a thronged and noticeable affair, and preparations were made for receiving some hundreds. And now there arose considerable agitation among the Grantleyites whether or no they would attend the episcopal bidding. The first feeling with them all was to send the briefest excuses both for themselves and their wives and daughters. But by degrees policy prevailed over passion. The archdeacon perceived that he would be making a false step if he allowed the cathedral clergy to give the bishop just ground of umbrage. They all met in conclave and agreed to go. They would show that they were willing to respect the office, much as they might dislike the man. They agreed to go. The old dean would crawl in, if it were but for half an hour. The chancellor, treasurer, archdeacon, prebendaries and minor canons would all go, and would all take their wives. Mr. Harding was especially bidden to do so, resolving in his heart to keep himself far removed from Mrs. Proudie. And Mrs. Bold was determined to go, though assured by her father that there was no necessity for such a sacrifice on her part. When all Barchester was to be there, neither Eleanor nor Mary Bold understood why they should stay away. Had they not been invited separately? And had not a separate little note from the chaplain, couched in the most respectful language, been enclosed with the huge episcopal card? And the Stanhopes would be there, one and all. Even the lethargic mother would so far bestir herself on such an occasion. They had only just arrived. The card was at the residence waiting for them. No one in Barchester had seen them, and what better opportunity could they have of showing themselves to the Barchester world? Some few old friends, such as the archdeacon and his wife, had called, and had found the doctor and his eldest daughter, but the elite of the family were not yet known. The doctor indeed wished in his heart to prevent the signora from accepting the bishop's invitation, but she herself had fully determined that she would accept it. If her father was ashamed of having his daughter carried into a bishop's palace, she had no such feeling. "Indeed I shall," she had said to her sister, who had gently endeavoured to dissuade her by saying that the company would consist wholly of parsons and parsons' wives. "Parsons, I suppose, are much the same as other men, if you strip them of their black coats. And as to their wives, I dare say they won't trouble me. You may tell Papa I don't at all mean to be left at home." Papa was told, and felt that he could do nothing but yield. He also felt that it was useless for him now to be ashamed of his children. Such as they were, they had become such under his auspices. As he had made his bed, so he must lie upon it. As he had sown his seed, so must he reap his corn. He did not indeed utter such reflections in such language, but such was the gist of his thoughts. It was not because Madeline was disabled that he shrank from seeing her make one of the bishop's guests, but because he knew that she would practise her accustomed lures, and behave herself in a way that could not fail of being distasteful to the propriety of English women. These things had annoyed but not shocked him in Italy. There they had shocked no one, but here in Barchester, here among his fellow parsons, he was ashamed that they should be seen. Such had been his feelings, but he repressed them. What if his brother clergyman was shocked? They could not take from him his preferment because the manners of his married daughter were too free. La Signora Neroni had, at any rate, no fear that she would shock anybody. Her ambition was to create a sensation, to have parsons at her feet, seeing that the manhood of Barchester consisted mainly of parsons, and to send, if possible, every parson's wife home with a green fit of jealousy. None could be too old for her, and hardly any too young. None too sanctified, and none too worldly. She was quite prepared to entrap the bishop himself, and then to turn up her nose at the bishop's wife. She did not doubt of success, for she had always succeeded, but one thing was absolutely necessary. She must secure the entire use of a sofa. The card sent to Dr. and Mrs. Stanhope and family had been so sent in an envelope, having on the cover Mr. Slope's name. The Signora soon learned that Mrs. Proudie was not yet at the palace, and that the chaplain was managing everything. It was much more in her line to apply to him than the lady, and she accordingly wrote him the prettiest little billet in the world. In 5 lines she explained everything, declared how impossible it was for her not to be desirous to make the acquaintance of such persons as the Bishop of Barchester and his wife, and she might add also of Mr. Slope, depicted her own grievous state, and concluded by being assured that Mrs. Proudie would forgive her extreme hardihood in petitioning to be allowed to be carried on a sofa. She then enclosed one of her beautiful cards. In return she received as polite an answer from Mr. Slope. A sofa should be kept in the large drawing-room immediately at the top of the grand stairs, especially for her use. And now the day of the party had arrived. The bishop and his wife came down from town only on the morning of the eventful day, as behoved such great people to do, but Mr. Slope had toiled day and night to see that everything should be in right order. There had been much to do. No company had been seen in the palace since heaven knows when. New furniture had been required, new pots and pans, new cups and saucers, new dishes and plates. Mrs. Proudie had at first declared that she would consent to nothing so vulgar as eating and drinking, but Mr. Slope had talked, or rather written, her out of economy. Bishops should be given to hospitality, and hospitality meant eating and drinking. So the supper was conceded. The guests, however, were to stand as they consumed it. There were 4 rooms opening into each other on the first floor of the house, which were denominated the drawing-rooms, the reception-room, and Mrs. Proudie's boudoir. In olden days one of these had been Bishop Grantley's bedroom, and another his common sitting-room and study. The present bishop, however, had been moved down into a back parlour, and had been given to understand that he could very well receive his clergy in the dining-room, should they arrive in too large a flock to be admitted into his small sanctum. He had been unwilling to yield, but after a short debate had yielded. Mrs. Proudie's heart beat high as she inspected her suite of rooms. They were really very magnificent, or at least would be so by candlelight, and they had nevertheless been got up with commendable economy. Large rooms, when full of people and full of light, look well, because they are large and are full and are light. Small rooms are those which require costly fittings and rich furniture. Mrs. Proudie knew this and made the most of it. She had therefore a huge gas lamp with a dozen burners hanging from each of the ceilings. People were to arrive at 10. Supper was to last from 12 till 1, and at 1:30 everyone was to be gone. Carriages were to come in at the gate in the town and depart at the gate outside. They were desired to take up at 1:15. It was managed excellently, and Mr. Slope was invaluable. At 9:30 the bishop and his wife and their 3 daughters entered the great reception-room, and very grand and very solemn they were. Mr. Slope was downstairs giving the last orders about the wine. He well understood that curates and country vicars with their belongings did not require so generous an article as the dignitaries of the close. There is a useful gradation in such things, and Marsala at 20 shillings a dozen did very well for the exterior supplementary tables in the corner. "A bishop," said the lady, as his lordship sat himself down, "don't sit on that sofa, if you please. It is to be kept separate for a lady." The bishop jumped up and seated himself on a cane-bottomed chair. "A lady?" he inquired meekly. "Do you mean one particular lady, my dear?" "Yes, Bishop, one particular lady," said his wife, disdaining to explain. "She has got no legs, papa," said the youngest daughter, tittering. "No legs?" said the bishop, opening his eyes. "Nonsense, Netta, what stuff you talk," said Olivia. "She has got legs, but she can't use them. She has always to be kept lying down, and 3 or 4 men carry her about everywhere." "Laws, how odd!" said Augusta. "Always carried about by 4 men? I'm sure I shouldn't like it." "Am I right behind, Mamma? I feel as if I were open." And she turned her back to her anxious parent. "Open? To be sure you are," said she, "and a yard of petticoat strings hanging out. I don't know why I pay such high wages to Mrs. Richards if she can't take the trouble to see whether or no you are fit to be looked at." And Mrs. Proudie poked the strings here and twitched the dress there, and gave her daughter a shove and a shake, and then pronounced it all right. "But," rejoined the bishop, who was dying with curiosity about the mysterious lady in her legs, "who is it that is to have the sofa? What's her name, Netta?" A thundering rap at the front door interrupted the conversation. Mrs. Proudie stood up and shook herself gently, and touched her cap on each side as she looked in the mirror. Each of the girls stood on tiptoe and rearranged the bows on their bosoms, and Mr. Slope rushed upstairs 3 steps at a time. "But who is it, Netta?" whispered the bishop to his youngest daughter. La Signora Madeline Vessi Neroni," whispered back the daughter. "And mind you don't let anyone sit upon the sofa." "La Signora Madeline Viccineroni?" muttered to himself the bewildered prelate. Had he been told that the Begum of Oud was to be there, or Queen Pomara of the Western Isles, he could not have been more astonished. La Signora Madeline Viccineroni, who, having no legs to stand on, has bespoken a sofa in his drawing-room? Who could she be? He, however, could now make no further inquiry, as Dr. and Mrs. Stanhope were announced. They had been sent on out of the way a little before the time, in order that the Signora might have plenty of time to get herself conveniently packed into the carriage. The bishop was all smiles for the prebendary's wife, and the bishop's wife was all smiles for the prebendary. Mr. Slope was presented, and was delighted to make the acquaintance of one of whom he had heard so much. The doctor bowed very low, and then looked as though he could not return the compliment as regarded Mr. Slope, of whom indeed he had heard nothing. The doctor, in spite of his long absence, knew an English gentleman when he saw him. And then the guests came in shoals. Mr. and Mrs. Quiverful and their 3 grown daughters, Mr. and Mrs. Chadwick and their 3 daughters, the burly Chancellor and his wife and clerical son from Oxford, the meagre little doctor without encumbrance, Mr. Harding with Eleanor and Miss Bold, the Dean leaning on a gaunt spinster, his only child now living with him, a lady very learned in stones, ferns, plants, and vermin, and who had written a book about petals. A wonderful woman in her way was Miss Trefoil. Mr. Finney, the attorney, with his wife, was to be seen, much to the dismay of many who had never met him in a drawing-room before. The 5 Barchester doctors were all there, and old Scalpon, the retired apothecary and tooth-drawer, who was first taught to consider himself as belonging to the higher orders by the receipt of the bishop's card. Then came the Archdeacon and his wife, with their elder daughter Griselda, a slim, pale, retiring girl of 17, who kept close to her mother, and looked out on the world with quiet, watchful eyes, one who gave promise of much beauty when time should have ripened it. And so the rooms became full, and knots were formed, and every newcomer paid his respects to my lord and passed on, not presuming to occupy too much of the great man's attention. The Archdeacon shook hands very heartily with Dr. Stanhope, and Mrs. Grantley seated herself by the doctor's wife, and Mrs. Proudie moved about with well-regulated grace, measuring out the quantity of her favours to the quality of her guests, just as Mr. Slope had been doing with the wine. But the sofa was still empty, and 25 ladies and 5 gentlemen had been courteously warned off it by the mindful chaplain. "Why doesn't she come?" said the bishop to himself. His mind was so preoccupied with the signora that he hardly remembered how to behave himself on bishop. At last a carriage dashed up to the hall steps with a very different manner of approach from that of any other vehicle that had been there that evening. A perfect commotion took place. The doctor, who heard it as he was standing in the drawing-room, knew that his daughter was coming, and retired into the farthest corner, where he might not see her entrance. Mrs. Proudie perked herself up, feeling that some important piece of business was in hand. The bishop was instinctively aware that La Signora Vichironi was come at last, and Mr. Slope hurried into the hall to give his assistance. He was, however, nearly knocked down and trampled on by the cortège that he encountered on the hall steps. He got himself picked up as well as he could, and followed the cortège upstairs. The signora was carried head foremost, her head being the care of her brother and an Italian manservant who was accustomed to the work. Her feet were in the care of the lady's maid and the lady's Italian page, and Charlotte Stanhope followed to see that all was done with due grace and decorum. In this manner they climbed easily into the drawing-room, and a broad way through the crowd having been opened, the signora rested safely on her couch. She had sent a servant beforehand to learn whether it was a right or a left-hand sofa, for it required that she should dress accordingly, particularly as regarded her bracelets. And very becoming her dress was. It was white velvet, without any other garniture than rich white lace worked with pearls across her bosom, and the same round the armlets of her dress. Across her brow she wore a band of red velvet, on the centre of which shone a magnificent Cupid in mosaic, the tints of whose wings were of the most lovely azure, and the colour of his chubby cheeks the clearest pink. On the one arm, which her position required her to expose, she wore 3 magnificent bracelets, each with different stones. Beneath her on the sofa, and over the cushion and head of it, was spread a crimson silk mantle or shawl, which went under her whole body and concealed her feet. Dressed as she was, and looking as she did, so beautiful and yet so motionless, with the pure brilliancy of her white dress brought out and strengthened by the colour beneath it, with that lovely head and those large, bold, bright, staring eyes, it was impossible that either man or woman should do other than look at her. Neither man nor woman for some minutes did do other. Her bearers, too, were worthy of note. The 3 servants were Italian, and though perhaps not peculiar in their own country, were very much so in the palace at Barchester. The man especially attracted notice, and created a doubt in the mind of some whether he were a friend or a domestic. The same doubt was felt as to Ethelbert. The man was attired in a loose-fitting common black cloth morning coat. He had a jaunty, fat, well-pleased, clean face, on which no atom of beard appeared, and he wore round his neck a loose black silk neck handkerchief. The bishop essayed to make him a bow, but the man, who was well trained, took no notice of him, and walked out of the room quite at his ease, followed by the woman and the boy. Ethelbert Stanhope was dressed in light blue from head to foot. He had on the loosest possible blue coat, cut square like a shooting coat, and very short. It was lined with silk of azure blue. He had on a blue satin waistcoat, a blue neck handkerchief which was fastened beneath his throat with a coral ring, and very loose trousers which almost concealed his feet. His soft, glossy beard was softer and more glossy than ever. The bishop, who had made one mistake, thought that he was also a servant, and therefore tried to make way for him to pass. But Ethelbert soon corrected the error. And I think there we shall stop for tonight, because as I say, I need to save my voice. Thank you for listening. Okay, Madeline Stanhope is fantastic and an incredible character. Wow. Just wow. What an entrance. What an entrance. Like, can you please save the sofa for me? I'm gonna wait like 2 hours and then make a huge entrance and a big fuss, and it's like, haha, I'm here. So, methinks we might have a new player in the game of Barchester. I reckon she's gonna do some stuff. Yeah, I like her. She's fun. But yes, thank you all very much for being here. Also, hello, Wolfstrike. Thank you very much. I hope you are enjoying. Welcome in. Yeah, I'm certainly enjoying. Absolute mastermind shit. I know, right? She knows what she's doing, and I kind of love that. But that's the thing, is like, I really like the fact that she's a character with agency. Like, it's so easy for especially literature of this kind of era. It's very easy for authors to, and very common, sadly, for authors to basically say, this person is disabled, therefore they have absolutely no agency of their own. They are basically just like controlled by everybody else. And I just kind of love the fact that she's just like, no, I can use this. Yeah, kind of love her. She's great. I've decided the Stanhope family are my new favourite people in this. It's going to be very entertaining. I also like the fact that Mr. Slope almost got trampled by her entourage. It's like, okay, this could be interesting. So, I'm enjoying. Do quite like. But yes, I know we're finishing a little early today, but as I say, I need to do a lot of talking tomorrow, so I need to save the old voice. But yeah, let's see who's on. Sam should be back on Saturday with more short stories of some description. And then possibly next Monday we might do a Chilitra tea stream. We haven't decided yet, but that seems like a good time as any. But let us see. Stephen's on. Huzzah. Right, I shall throw you all over to our good friend Stephen. Go send him some love. Stephen's lovely. We all like Stephen. And he's playing some demos. Oh, he's currently playing a Viva La Dirt League game by the looks of things. That's quite funny. I know them because my brother is obsessed with them. But yes, go, take care of yourselves, take care of everybody around you, be well, all of the things. In theory, we should be back on Saturday with some short stories. But yeah, until then, take care of yourselves, and we will see you soon, and goodbye and good night. Bye bye.